Welcome to Echo Ekoji, the podcast of Ekoji Buddhist Temple in Fairfax Station, Virginia. I'm Andrea Chapman, president of Ekoji. Today, I'm joined by my co-host Joe Gochi, a member of Seattle Betsuine, a regular attendee at White River Buddhist Temple, and a virtual member of Ekoji. Over the past few years, Echo Ekoji has had the privilege of interviewing ministers and Sangha members, including BCA Bishop Marvin Harada. Today's guest is truly a luminary in the world of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, Reverend Dr. Kenneth Tanaka.
Reverend Tanaka is Professor Emeritus at Musashino University in Tokyo, a past resident minister, and an internationally respected scholar whose career bridges the United States, Japan, and beyond. He's written and edited seminal works including Ocean, Jewels, Engage Pure Land Buddhism, and the Faces of Buddhism in America. He's given keynote addresses at major Shin Buddhist observances and has pioneered online Buddhist education through his Fireside Chat courses, fostering the vision of a global Sangha. I've had the privilege of being both a student and a participant in those courses, and I'm already signed up for this coming October's course, and Andrea and I are honored to welcome him today. Andrea, let's start.
So welcome, Reverend Tanaka. Your life bridges Japan and the United States in a unique way. How did growing up in both cultures shape your path to Jodo Shinshu?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and nice to meet you, Andrea, and then good to see you, Joe. I just want to mention one other thing about my background, which I think is important, is that I did of course, served in a temple in BCA, but also was an assistant dean and assistant professor at IBS for 10 years. So that needs probably would be better to have that in there. So my heart, and actually BCA is my home organization, and that's where I was nurtured as a young kid, Dharma school, and then, YBA, and then on to become a minister and a scholar. So anyway, to answer your question, this is really the toughest question that I had. And to make it simple and direct, I would say, I've lived half of my time in Japan, half the time in the US. And I was born in Japan, but my family had been part of the U.S. since my great-grandfather's period, because he's the one that started all this by immigrating to Hawaii in the early, 20th century. Anyway, so I would say Japan has provided me with a kind of like the unconscious dimension, and maybe the US, the conscious. And I want to explain that very briefly. Unconscious, or maybe not recognizing consciously about what Buddhism is about. I was influenced by aspects of Buddhism in Japan when I was little. For example, one of my ancestors had been a doctor in the Yamaguchi prefecture. Yeah. And then when the Meiji Reformation came, I found out later that he had become a priest. He started a temple. But I don't know much about him. Also, my kindergarten in Japan, I did go to a kindergarten run by a Buddhist temple. And then right before I came to the U.S. in 1958, somehow my grandparents took me to, who brought me over, because my parents had already been here, and they took me to Mount Koya, which is the center of Shingon Buddhism. And I didn't know anything about Buddhism. A typical Japanese family, you're considered kind of Buddhist. If people ask me, what are you? I don't know what I would have said then, But I remember going to Mount Koya and was so impressed by the serenity and the calm and kind of a sense of awe about, the religious setting. But I didn't know anything about Buddhism. And so then I come over, and right away, my next door neighbor, who happened to be a Christian minister, says, "Well, in America, you got to go to church." So we ended up, my brother and I, we ended up going to a Seventh-day Adventist church for a year and a half. And that's when, I am consciously, personally involved in a religion, as an individual, I'm participating. And then about a couple years later, I moved to another part of town and then got a chance to go to a Buddhist temple. And that's when I began to, learn about religion. And of course, I was learning about Christianity too. And so it's the conscious part, consciously becoming religious, or, yeah. Whereas in Japan, it was more by osmosis, but you weren't conscious of the fact that you were doing anything Buddhist. So that, to answer to your question, I would be Japan gave me kind of the unconscious or uncognizable dimension. And then in America, America is much more of a quote unquote religious country where people consciously go to, Sunday school and, church services, and you need to define yourself as one thing or another. And so I would say those are the, what came to mind about the two cultures. And yeah.
Yeah. Reverend Tanaka, that really resonates with me because my wife, Margaret, grew up in a Buddhist, Jodo Shinshu Buddhist household. And for her, I think the Buddhism and the calmness and all that just comes naturally. And for me, it's been a thought process. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You were ordained in 1978. What drew you from academic Buddhist studies into the ministry, and how have those two roles enriched each other?
Well, actually, they're not really two distinct elements. They're one. And essentially, my interest in Buddhism had to do with religious or spiritual interest, and not so much quote academic. And so I was, in many ways, I wasn't the Buddhist scholar that people expect. That is, you take interest in philology. I can read texts, but my real interest is not so much about the history or, this figure belongs to this lineage of thought. Those things are fine, but I was never that interested. What I was interested in, how does the Dharma impact me? Because my reason for starting taking my interest in Buddhism was because of my, existential unease about life. One being that, why do we have so much suffering, and specifically fear of death, and at a young age, I felt that to some extent, or probably more than others, obviously. And the fact that my parents never got along very well, they were always quarreling, and my family life was not, wholesome, and so so my need was to overcome dukkha, as we say in Buddhism, is dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness, and so fundamentally. My motivation was religious and spiritual more than academic. The academic came with it because, I like to learn more about Buddhism, and so I think having both has helped me in that. For example, Joe has been taking our course, and I'm able to talk about things because I have a broader background academically, not only Jodo Shinshu, but the broader, Mahayana tradition. And in fact, right after I graduated from college, I spent some time in a Thai monastery as a novice monk for a couple of months, and that has really impacted the way I look at Buddhism, and so I like to hope that I have a broader perspective and knowledge, which enables me to talk about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in ways that maybe others who only have had, only a Shinshu education.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, I just want to say that, Shinran said, "I'm neither monk nor lay." So, in a way, I'm neither scholar nor minister. I'm neither, but at the same time, both. And that's how I like it. That's my identity. I feel very comfortable with that. But I wasn't a great Buddhist scholar as some of my colleagues who went on to, become professors at big fancy universities. But I did feel inferior because I just couldn't, I wasn't as good as them in reading Sanskrit. But now, after the age of 50, when I really found my stride, I felt very comfortable, and I said, "Yeah, this is me. I have to be myself."
With that unique identity or perspective that you shaped in both the temple and the academic settings, what would you say are the strengths and the limitations of each when it comes to sharing the Dharma?
Oh, okay. Well, when we say share the Dharma, I think usually you're dealing with lay people, not so scholars, because scholars, they know what they want and they've learned it themselves. So in order to share the Dharma, I think you have to have more of the religious dimension, because that's where most people are at. Using the analogy of the top of the mountain or top of the hill, that the essence of Buddhism or any religion is reaching the top of the mountain, and maybe many of the scholars are already there because they have their own views, but a lot of people, lay people, are at the foot of the hill or the mountain, and so I think it's better to. It's more beneficial to have the religious and the spiritual dimension in mind when you want to share the Dharma.
Good. You've spoken and written extensively about the Americanization of Buddhism. How has Jodo Shinshu already adapted to the American context, and what unique challenges or opportunities do you see ahead for the tradition?
Okay. Let me use an anecdote. When I was in Japan, in Tokyo, speaking to some of the young Shin Buddhist ministers, and it was around the Ohigan time, the equinox time, and I said, "Oh, we're getting ready for the equinox, fall service, and we need to talk about the 6 perfections, 6 paramitas." And they looked at me as if they didn't quite understand what I was saying. I said, "Well, you do emphasize 6 perfections, don't you?" And they said, "What?" And the night and day are equal. The weather's nice, so we're taught to really engage in our practice. And they had no idea. And then I found out that it was not part of the Jodo Shinshu tradition at all, 0.
Yep.
And so later I learned about the fact that even prior to Second World War, the BCA, the Jodo Shinshu in America, had already instituted 6 perfections and 8 Noble Path in the so-called early Buddhism, basic Buddhism, or what we say general Buddhism, and they have been practiced and promoted to a great extent, which you would never see in Japan, because that probably will be considered quote unquote self-power. And so that's the one clear example difference between or the Americanization of Jodo Shinshu. Yeah. In terms of Buddhism as a whole, I think that the emphasis on meditation and practice is clearly a hallmark, and that is one aspect that has really gotten many people interested in Buddhism and other maybe Eastern traditions. But so with regard to Jodo Shinshu and meditation, well, Joe knows that I do talk about what's called Nembutsu meditation. And so, like many ministers in the US, Canada, and Europe, Shin Buddhist ministers, I would say half of them are instituting some form of meditation because, it's what draws people. And I remember when I first became a minister at the Southern Alameda County Buddhist Church, I used to get phone calls saying, "Oh, when do you do your meditation?" And I would say, "Well, we're Jodo Shinshu, we don't do that." And then right away, hang up. So we lose them. And I thought, oh, this is not a way to go. And then what happened was I started to do, study classes, which was my forte. But I didn't, I'm not trained so much, except in Thailand. I've had some meditative practice more than most ministers. So I had a little bit of that. And so I went back to that. And I said, okay, we can do something like meditation by, when I do my night class, study class, I would have those who are interested to come early and then, have them go through the mannerism of, going to the Buddha hall and then, bowing and then walking slowly up to the incense burner. And all the gestures are done mindfully and then chanting mindfully. So you make the whole process, the entire Shin Buddhist religious act more meditative, and people who came, they were quite happy with it, and they were quite satisfied. And so when I said, well, we're all having study classes, but also at the same time meditation, and that increased the number of people who came to I was I don't want to toot my own horn, but I was at that temple for 3 years, and we had 250 members when I came, and then within 3 years we had another 50 more families. And so I think that it can be done, but and I was glad also that the board was all for it, all for growing. And so with their support, we did have an increase in the membership.
Thank you.
Growth does require change, indeed.
Yeah.
Which aspects of Jodo Shinshu teachings do you think most resonate with people in the 21st century?
Okay. Well, this is a complex one. I would say, it is, as we often say, Jodo Shinshu is for ordinary householders. And what people don't realize is Buddhism is essentially monastic tradition. Let's say, Buddha was monastic. So was Shinran initially. But Shinran, went to a tradition that was unorthodox. I mean, it was unusual to have a group of Buddhists who were not monks and nuns who were seriously engaged in the teaching. So Jodo Shinshu has that quality, and even though fundamentally Buddhism it has a very strong monastic tendency. So it's for ordinary people, householders, but at the same time, so in a way, that is the reason why, I talk about this in one of my classes, and how when I introduced myself to a American Zen priest, that I was Jodo Shinshu, and then she said, "Oh, you're the Christian Buddhist," and I still remember this, and actually, it's at the I think about that quite often. And on the surface, it does. You have, God and Amida and heaven and Pure Land. But it's quite different when you go deeper. And basically, I mean, keeping it very simple, what looks like Christianity, they are different in that they're basically symbolic. Whereas for most Christians, and I can't speak for all Christians because people have different views, but for most Christians, and I can back it up by findings in Pew's Research Center, they do these surveys, and most Christians, when they think of God, they say they believe in God that as described in the Bible, which means that it's not symbolic, it's historical, it's more literal. And so, but whereas in Jodo Shinshu, to answer a question, it's for ordinary people, householders, but it doesn't have some of the baggage. And if some, because I say baggage with caution, because there are people who come to Buddhism because they have felt that they could not keep up with maybe the literal interpretation of the God and heaven and etc. And so it's essentially Buddhism is a religion of awakening, not so much a religion in belief. And Jodo Shinshu is exactly that, even though some other Buddhists may think we're religion of belief. But so that's one.
So Andrea and I, over the last few months, have been participating in sessions with Reverend Bob and Reverend Patty from Sacramento, and they refer to it, the conversation periods, as Sanghas Without Borders. And last night, an 85-year-old woman made an eloquent set of comments about how difficult she's finding it right now to live her life with all the turmoil that we're witnessing around the country and perhaps around the world. So how might Jodo Shinshu offer resources or ways to navigate today's political, social, or economic turbulence?
Yeah. Well, that's a toughie. Well, one of the concepts or teachings is interdependence. And it's not only Jodo Shinshu, but Buddhism in general, or non-self. Non-self, if you flip it around, it means that we are all interdependent. There's that I am not, independent of others, and then I do change. So that I am characterized by something that is interconnected. I'm supported by others. At the same time, we are constantly changing, and so we cite this often, and we come up with the message that therefore we are grateful, and we emphasize that quite a bit. As you know, I would say that the bulk of our sermons have to do with this kind of theme, but one aspect of interdependence is not talked about very much, and that is that because we don't have the substantial self, we cannot control what happens to us. What happens in the world, we cannot control. And it may sound a little pessimistic, but the teaching of interdependence tells us that things happen due to causes and conditions that are beyond my control. And that teaching is helpful in helping me to accept the situation. That has to do with aging, sickness, but also the society in general, the conditioned society. What's happening now is due to causes and conditions that are beyond my control. And if you have that, you're able to better accept, rather than saying, why isn't it the way it should be? Well, it should be is really your quote unquote self-centered perspective. And unfortunately, and I know this well because, I've become an avid Ohtani Shohei baseball fan. And then and consequently, I root for the Dodgers now, although with a sense of guilt because I grew up in the Bay Area and I grew up, cheering Willie Mays and Orlando Cepeda and Juan Marichal and San Francisco Giants. So, but I like Shohei Ohtani not only because he's Japanese, and I'm sure that has certainly a lot to do with it, but well, he's a great player, and he's also a nice guy, very respectful, and he always tips his cap to the manager of the opposing team whenever he goes up to bat. I mean, very refreshing. Anyway, so being a Ohtani fan and Dodgers fan, being a fan of any sport team, it is challenging because you get really, I mean, surprisingly upset when they lose and do badly. And it's been pretty rough July, for Dodgers. They're still not quite there. I'm not sure if they're going to make it this year. But, applying the teaching of interdependence, from the middle of July, I had to go through some almost trauma. Why are they doing so badly? And I said, oh, yes, the Buddhist teaching of interdependence. You just can't control.
Yeah.
You know in your head, but that's the whole thing. You don't know in your heart.
Yeah.
I would say head, heart, and the gut. I think Buddhism or any spirituality, it really comes down to the gut, the visceral, and we have to really get it down to that level to really be able to apply it.
Very nice. Thank you.
In your book, Jewels, you highlight equality, engagement, and humor as unique aspects of American Buddhism. Which do you feel is most vital for the future?
Okay. I would say the most is none of those. I think it's the meditation and practice dimension. As I said earlier, it's a teaching of Buddhism is a religion of awakening, and it's not one of belief. And as some of you know, in the audience who know that the traditions in Japanese cultures like flower arrangement or judo or karate or any of those disciplines that has a word called do. Do means path. And path entails practice and cultivation and maturation. And so Buddhism is not a religion where you believe in something that you cannot, capture with your five senses. It's something where you cultivate yourself, and it takes time, and it matures, and so in that context, I think that meditation or nembutsu, these are practices that enables us to mature on a cultivational path, and so I would say that that will probably enable Buddhism to continue to grow, not exponentially, but it's grown quite a bit since when I was a child growing up in the early 1960s, and that has to do with the fact that there is that practice dimension, and so in that context for Jodo Shinshu, I think that we have to kind of develop practice and not be worried that it's self-powered and we can't do anything. And so in my next upcoming class, I'm going to really deal with this issue of being fearful of doing anything because it would be deemed self-power. When I was teaching in Japan, one of my graduate students, she was a Jodo Shinshu, had Jodo Shinshu background, and she says, I mean, the Shinshu group in Japan has kind of become pretty pathetic in that some people will not give up their seat to an elderly person in a train because, oh, that would be self-power, and we all laughed about it because we understand that, that kind of a sentiment that, and anyway, so that is related to the actively doing something, but always realizing that what you do in meditation or Nembutsu is not the cause of you realizing awakening. That comes beyond from other power, Amida's compassion, and we are all embracing that oneness. And so meditation and practices enables us to come to that realization. And so anyway, let me stop myself here.
Your Fireside Chat courses bring together people from around the globe. What have you learned about effective Buddhist education in the online era?
Well, the new technology has really enabled us to do things that was unthinkable in the past, and so the classes, we need to, well, let's just say, I can only speak for what I'm doing, is that we need to have a clear theme, what we're trying to talk, what we're discussing, what we're trying to deepen in terms of our understanding. But also, it's a way of bringing, diverse kinds of people. And I have found that, so in my Fireside Chat classes, my first year in 2022, I was the only speaker. I talked about Shin Buddhism. But from the second year, I began to invite both a layperson and a minister or an ordained person and have them also express their views. And I have found that the response has been very good in terms of how many of them enjoyed listening to their fellow laypersons. And I think they can kind of say, oh yeah, the ministers, they're doing their thing, they have to do that. But we have our questions, and so they resonated with the lay people. And so, and I think that getting their peers to be speaking and sharing and including the doubts that they have, and that goes a long way for the seekers to gain motivation and be inspired by them. And Joe was one of those speakers, and he certainly inspired other fellow lay people.
Thank you.
Absolutely. For smaller temples like Ekoji, often with limited resources, what practical steps can we take to expand the outreach and the education?
Okay. Well, I would say you're already doing, this and reaching out, using the digital medium. That is essential now. I mean, so that's that. But but at the same time, if you can get people who live in the area to actually come out to the temple, motivate them to do that, and then really actually be part of a living Sangha, because I think that is one of the strengths of any religion. And we have Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and it's a set, and so the Sangha can really motivate you and encourage you. And just like I had talked earlier about how what a group of us who attended a summer session in 1969 at IBS, 12 of us, of the 12, 9 of us became ministers, ordained, because partly because of the peer and the camaraderie that we had. So Sangha is very important, and the other thing too is that there's a whole issue. This is a big issue of ethnicity and beyond, and I mean, I think we'll be touching upon this a little bit. That Shin Buddhism obviously came out of Japan in a cultural setting, and it was nurtured through the Japanese Americans who were Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, and so there sometimes, in order to universalize it, we may say, well, we gotta throw away the Japanese dimension. But I think given the condition in the U.S., that it's important to maintain aspects of Japanese culture, to give it kind of a maybe uniqueness or distinctness for people to be drawn to the temple, not only for the religious, primarily for religious, but I think the Japanese dimension of food and bazaars and culture and so earlier we were talking about I think how to make temples more vibrant, and I did want to emphasize the fact that temples draw people for various reasons, not only spiritual or religious. And so, Joe, you probably heard me talk about B Buddhists.
Yes.
B starts with, so people who come to temple, I mean, we want Buddhists, B Buddhists, but there are people who come because they're basketball Buddhists. And maybe it doesn't ring true on the East Coast because you don't have all these like gymnasiums which draw people, so we call them B Buddhists, basketball Buddhists, or bazaar Buddhists. I mean, some people just come out to the temple once a year, and they go out and help out at the bazaar, and they have their role to play in a teriyaki chicken booth, and barbecue. Oh, that's right, that's another one, barbecue Buddhists. And there's also the other thing is, like there are people who are good in administration. They run the temple, but they hardly ever come to the Sunday service, and there's the discrepancy, and I call them bored Buddhists, B Buddhists. And also some people say, well, we want to have a place to have my, what do you call it? Where I, after death, I want to have some place for my ashes or whatever. So I call them burial Buddhists, B Buddhists. So
In Seattle, there are pickleball Buddhists and then definitely Obon Buddhists.
Yeah.
There'll be 1,000 people at the summer festival, but perhaps 98% of them are people that don't attend the temple, but they're introduced to it.
Yeah. So we need to acknowledge that. And if you want to have a more of a vibrant, so I've used this metaphor of a huge sangha or a temple being a huge tent, and then but what is important is what's holding up the tent. The central pole used to be ethnic. It was a Japanese cultural and social center. But we need to change the center pole, the quality of that, to be Dharma, which will then enable diverse people to come under the tent. And so you have burial Buddhists and bored Buddhists and even bored Buddhists, not bored, but bored. But they can be bored with the religion, but maybe if they keep coming, they start, taking and becoming Buddhist. But I think in terms of, so that's the thing about American religious institution. It's always been comprised of people who are not, strictly interested in religion. So I think that if you want to have a large involvement, you have to have broader set of people. And I think that's a kind of an image for us to have.
Well, over the years, you've worked with youth and adults alike. How do you make Jodo Shinshu accessible to newcomers without oversimplifying its depth?
Hmm. Well, I don't think you can ever oversimplify, and uh, so uh, especially with regard to Shin Temple, making it accessible. We need to start with something that they can relate to, and I mean, there are two ways of thinking about this. Some people say, well, we just have to just stick with Jodo Shinshu, Amida, Pure Land, Shinjin. But I think that's a high hurdle for many people that, as I said, Shinran went through the so-called basic Buddhism or general Buddhism. And so, we need to talk about the Four Noble Truths. And that's the easiest place to get started, wherein you have the six perfections or eightfold truth, the practices.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to worry about oversimplification.
Excellent.
Whatever we say would be rather new for newcomers, and so. But we need to, when we introduce teachings, it should be something that they can munch on, and not something that they can they have to scratch in their head. Is what does it mean, and so.
Excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. Could you share your vision for a global Sangha and how you see local Sanghas connecting to that wider community?
Yeah, I think group. Well, I can only speak for what I'm doing in that in the classes that I've been running. Um, um, uh, we've drawn people from Brazil and Europe, and mostly from North America and then Japan. And so needless to say, the technology allows us to do things that was unthinkable. It's just amazing. And so and in my classes, I've also last year that we just had once a month classes, but I realized we don't have enough time for people to interact. So I instituted the 2 weeks after the regular class, or halfway in the middle between the two regular classes, what I call in-depth discussion. And for those who are, seriously interested, they came out, and also allowed time for them to break up into smaller groups and be able to talk to, people from, other parts of the world. And so that is, it's all made possible because of the technology. But I'm not quite sure about, sanghas plugging into a broader global sangha, because, I have no answer to that. I just think that, probably the most sanghas are too busy, too preoccupied to really collectively plug into a greater global sangha. I think that yeah, so maybe individuals of a particular sangha can plug into a greater global sangha, and then maybe they can bring back that inspiration they have, and enliven their local sangha. Yeah.
I would
Let me
totally
follow
agree.
on that because I found Ekoji during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Andrea and I have never been in the same room together. We have never met one face to face.
Oh, really?
Feel that there's a genuine friendship that has developed.
Hmm.
So, what role can technology play in connecting sanghas and sangha members while still fostering a genuine relationship? I think you've developed probably genuine relationships with people during your fireside chats that
Hmm.
you've never met.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think the intimacy, kind of informality, the intimacy, have been have been elements that made the gathering more effective. And even the term fireside chat, it's more relaxing, more, informal. And I think that has fostered, you know, uh, more discussion, getting to know one another, even though we've never met in person.
Right.
And so it can be done, and it is being done. And well, you guys are also doing that too. So
Thank you.
Yeah. You've participated in interfaith dialogues worldwide. How has that shaped your understanding of Shin Buddhism's place in the broader religious landscape?
yeah, well, this one, well, definitely, uh, I I I got to know how other people of other religions think about themselves and their religion and our religion. And let me just, I'm thinking, uh, one episode, I was involved in this Buddhist Christian dialogue amongst, basically scholars. It was held at Indianapolis, uh, Purdue University. And we broke up into one small group one time, and the theme was, can the other person be saved? I mean, so, and in my group, there was two Christians and two Buddhists. The other Buddhist was Tibetan Buddhist. And I asked my Christian partner, whom I knew pretty well, as a personally and very progressive person. And I posed that question, can I be saved? And she looked at me and goes, I'm sorry, no. Because on a personal level, I'm sure she felt that, I should be, or I ought to be, but doctrinally, it wouldn't allow her, because unless you believe in the resurrection, that, in her theology, I could not be saved. And that really kind of, but I knew, in my head that that kind of thinking was out there, but to be told, personally that I wouldn't be saved,
Yeah.
it was a kind of an eye-opening event, and it made me real. And then we didn't have time to really for her to ask me whether she would be saved, because time ran out. But what happened was, well, no, not what happened, but if I were asked, I would say, why not? Why not? What, I have no basis on which to make, a judgment as to whether she would be saved or not. And I would say, given that I respect Christianity and its teachings, and I'm sure you would be saved. I could never say, I'm sorry, no. And so therein lies at least one dimension of of uh, of the two religions. And having said this, I don't want to make a general judgment, because I know that in terms of even the survey that I have seen from Pew Research Center, you're familiar with Pew Research Center, right? It's the, I think the survey outfit that does checks in, studies religious attitudes, and um, uh, I would say that not all Christians feel that way, and so we need to be. I just want to qualify that. So as for the question, as the other aspects of it, well, the one of the reasons why I've taken an interest in Christianity, not only because I went to a Seventh-day Adventist church, and I respected the minister there. very dedicated, but also the fact that in discussing Buddhism in the U.S., you need to understand, or I needed to understand Christianity to some degree to talk about Buddhism. I have, there's a background in everything, we do, not everything, but in the language that we use, English, and it originates in the Jewish Christian tradition, and so I need to have that in background, and especially as we often said, and I've mentioned before, that Shin Buddhism on the surface look somewhat like Christianity, and so need to know more about it in order to be able to talk about Shin Buddhism, wisely or correctly.
Let's go back to that discussion with the two Christians and the two Buddhists sitting together. And what if one of the Christians had asked you, the woman that you were speaking of, if she'd asked you, can I get to the Pure Land? What would you have said to her?
Oh, can I get to the Pure Land? Oh, well, you can certainly get to heaven, and if you by mean Pure Land, so if you're saying, can I get to your Pure Land?
Yes, the Jodo Shinshu Pure Land.
Okay. I would say, why not? I mean, because that would be my initial reaction.
I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Shinran said, Pure Land, more intellectually expressing, it is a land of, a land of immeasurable light, and it is not confined, it is not limited.
Yes.
It's universal, so it's not limited. So that and I would think that it's not for me to limit, and that essentially the universal dimension is the aspect of the true religion.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, I mean, I also realize that, there are people in the Christian tradition, especially the mystics, of like Meister Eckhart and people, who were kind of pushed to the side, not so much the mainstream. And so if you look at people who have reached the highest levels of their religious tradition, they have much more in common. Or better yet, I've used this analogy that religions, there are different ways of looking at religion. And in my Jewels book, at the end, I talk about religious relationships, and we all know the metaphor of the getting to the top of the mountain. Like there's one truth, and we all go to the top of the mountain. Different ways of going to the top of the mountain represent the different religions. But rather than that, okay, I'm getting too far into the metaphor. So I want to say, okay, so in order to acknowledge the distinctiveness of each religion, you can say that each religion is a separate mountain. You have a Christian mountain, Buddhist mountain. But those who go to the top of the mountain, their view is very similar, almost the same. But that's different from people in your own mountain who's at the bottom. Their view is, you have people at the top will have more in common than with the people at the bottom. And so, so that's the point. I think you got the point. The other point, I did want to kind of explain the metaphor that, notion of that there's one mountain and there's one truth. And the problem with that is that that it doesn't acknowledge the distinctiveness. And also, there's a whole attitude or view of what's called exclusive view, that we have the only path to the top of the mountain. The others, can't get there. But in order to acknowledge both the commonality and the distinctiveness, I've talked about that actually different religions are like the different peaks of a same mountain range. We're on the same mountain range,
Yes.
but we have different peaks. And I think that's the at least that for me that's the best way to look at religion. And so as I was saying, that in the Christian tradition and Sufi tradition and Hindu tradition, you have those who reach the highest levels, and they all have, I think, they have very similar views of Meister Eckhart talks about Godhead, whereas Shinshu, if we stop just at Amida as a kind of anthropomorphic, human-like presentation, it's somewhat limited, but it is rooted in oneness, the Dharmakaya, or the ultimate truth, and that is similar to Godhead, and 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 so there are cultural expressions like Amida and maybe God of the Bible, but those are kind of products of that time and that culture. But we have to go up to the higher level or a deeper level, which really has universal quality.
Thank you.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the most urgent priorities for Jodo Shinshu leaders in the next decade?
I want to go back to that metaphor of the tent, the huge tent. So the temples need to definitely make clear that the center pole is Dharma and not ethnic or social or cultural. So if we can do that, then the temples would be much more open to a broader set of people and or also broader needs. And so, but again, this also takes time because we got to deal with people's attitudes and how they're brought up, and so it's a matter of time. But the leadership needs to really make clear what is important, and I think in order to survive, we have to go more into that direction. Again, not necessarily, going too extreme in trying to expunge anything,
Right.
Japanese. Okay.
But along that line, how might the next generation of leaders, ministers, and lay people differ from past generations?
Well, I think I would repeat the same thing.
Okay.
The leadership. I think first of all, leadership they should understand the teachings. As I was saying earlier, there's a tendency for administrators and those who run the temples to be more interested in running the temples, but not really the teachings. And so ideally we have someone who have both, and so I think that there's always been that kind of tension, and I mean, when I was a minister at a temple, those who were most critical of what I was doing were those who never came to Sunday services. No, and because they, but unfortunately, or reality is that you always going to have those kinds of people, and so if we're going to talk about leadership in the future, ideally we get people who have that religious value religion, which is odd to say, at a temple or any church. Yeah.
So this next question, I'm very curious what your answer will be. If you can change one thing about how Jodo Shinshu operates in America today, what would it be and why?
I think we need to inspire people. And in order to do that, we have to use skillful means and to bring people to the temple and make them interested. And that also requires, friendliness too, to be able, be more, care about people. And that's the bottom line. I think basically, maybe, in our discussion, we're, emphasizing religion and religious education, which is rightfully true. But at the same time, we also probably need to realize that when at the end of the day, people are looking for, love, compassion, friendliness, togetherness, unity, and that's to be genuinely people friendly. And I remember, and this will kind of symbolize it. When I was at IBS, or soon after I got out, one of the senior lay leaders whom I respected, he told me, he says, "Remember, Ken, when you go to the temple, they don't care how much you know about Shin Buddhism, but they just want to know if you're a nice guy or not, if you're a good person or not." And that's always reminded me of what we cannot forget, that at the end of the day, that's what counts. And of course, you have to have both. But sometimes, maybe we may push religion, and the other related to that is that, see, the Buddhist teachings include, even with Jodo Shinshu too, is that we emphasize salvation, or enlightenment, awakening. And when you teach a course, it inevitably happens because you have to have kind of a goal, and that is a goal, and that we cannot sacrifice or minimize. But at the same time, if you're talking about temples or religious institution in America or North America, then we have to keep in mind the humanity dimension of it, the pastoral dimension. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's one of the problems with those of us who get ordained, and we study the teaching so much, and you come back, and I remember some of my sermons at the very beginning, they were so academic and so, kind of, spouting off doctrine, and I kind of cringe when I think back those days, and poor people who were listening, I mean, I think that, they just didn't see the humanity in all of this. Okay.
Reminds me of my first year teaching back in 1974, and I had two young men in the back of the classroom, and they would just go like this, reminding me that I needed to bring it back down to their level. And that I remember their names, and I still am grateful for that. So we're in the home stretch here. We have 4 quick questions for you down at the end here. Across your career, has there been a moment that has affirmed your decision, your calling to share the Dharma with others?
When people, just commented, "Oh, I benefit from what you have to say," and either through what I said in a sermon or a Dharma talk, or in what they wrote, what they read, in what. So those are the moments that make me feel like, well, it's worth my effort, and I think it's true for all people in my predicament. I'm sure with Joe as a teacher, when students benefit and they tell you so, and then those are the moments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. after decades of teaching, what keeps your own practice alive and fresh?
Well, um, I would say happy hour after, after my,
Yeah.
well, in a way, so I'm teaching right now at in Tokyo. There is a Honganji has what they've done is their temple is at Tsukiji, it's kind of little in the outskirt, but it's close to Ginza. And Ginza is, like the Fifth Avenue or, France. And so they actually started a salon, like they call it Ginza Salon, and where they offer classes on Buddhism and Shin Buddhism and other different kinds of classes. And so I've been teaching there for 5 years or so, and before COVID, what I really relished or enjoyed was going after class, going to the coffee shop to have the happy hour. They serve beer at coffee shops in Japan, so alcohol is everywhere. So it's one disadvantage or benefit or whatever. I mean, I don't drink very much. Just one beer is enough. And I really enjoy listening to what people have to say. And not only about my class, but what what um, what what they're going through in life. And I remember talking to a middle-aged lady, and she actually opened up and said, I'm not a regular employed person. So in Japan, there are two classes of employees. Those who are, full-time and not only full-time, but they're legit company person. And there are those who, and given the economic woes of Japan in the last 30 years, that there are more people who don't fit in that group, and they only probably get paid two-thirds of the average, the regular people. And she was kind of sharing the difficulties that she was having, and as a woman too, and so I learned about, not everyone, are college professors and working at this, fancy. So, I mean, you learn about the people who are at, in different conditions.
Yeah.
So going back to your question, of course, I'm half kidding, of course, but that has been one of my reasons why. And then after COVID, that ended, and then we're on Zoom, and then I went back, and 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 still, we were not having these happy hours afterwards. So I finally told them, I don't want to teach anymore if you're not going to allow me to use your classroom to have happen. So rather than even going to coffee shops, because it's hard to find tables with 5, 6, 7, 8 people. So last month, for the first time, we held it right after class. They arranged it, and we had a wonderful time. And actually, yeah, that class was interesting because it was on grief. And these women, they're all women actually, and they began talking about their, losing their husbands. And you learn about things that you never hear, because Japanese are not as open, and they will never talk to a stranger. But in a condition like that, they really go the opposite direction. They'll open up everything. Well, maybe not everything, but I mean, very, very, intimate discussion, and those are the benefits. So of course, and the other part that really keeps my practice and my whatever my fresh is just teaching and studying for it, and they open up new vistas whenever I do that. So.
Well, Reverend Tanaka, you know that I'm grateful for the lessons that you've taught me. I will take, and I have used simple things like life is a bumpy road,
Yeah.
not only in my own life to help ground me, but also to share with friends when they're going through difficult times. So as you look back on your life, is there a lesson or a story from one of your teachers that you find yourself returning to time and time again?
Mm. Well, I think, um, a number of uh, anecdotes, but I thought of, well, first of all, who are my main teachers? Joe, you heard me talk about Professor Miyagi Kakue Sensei,
Yes.
and then Kusada Sensei. And then also, though I wouldn't really call him my sensei, but we were really worked together as Dr. Alfred Bloom.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was my senpai, and I worked with him for 8 years, and we went through the ups and downs of running IBS, and so I would say that what I picked up from them is basically their passion and their love for the religion, for what they're doing. Um, I'm just thinking of Bloom Sensei. There is a. I was trying to dig up this photo, but I couldn't find it. But there is one photo of him um, looking up at the statue of Amida, and he has this such a wonderful smile and genuine happiness and his love for Amida,
Yeah.
and he's such an intellectual guy. I used to tell him he used this his sermons are pretty intellectual, and I kept telling him that you have to bring it down more, and when he says yeah, but I mean, so, but that's him. I mean, especially being a convert, he came in because of the intellectual interest but the point that I wanted to emphasize is the passion and the love that goes, it's much more fundamental than and the intellectual part of it. And that's what kept him going.
Yeah.
So, I think about him a lot. I mean, and then Miyagi Sensei, there's passion. He used to come up to IBS to lecture, and twice he fainted. Nothing serious, but we had to call an ambulance.
Yeah.
And the second time we called him, the same ambulance guy was there, and he came in and says, "Oh, I know him." It's the same. He got so excited when he talked, and he was around. Well, he was my age. I thought he was really old, and then he was old, and I am old too now. But his passion exhibited in the way he taught his class. And then Reverend Kusada, he had the passion, but it was more quiet, very settled, and especially his chanting. Well, he was a master of chanting, and so when he did that, he was dead, well, quote, serious,
Yeah.
very into it. So to answer your question, I would say, their passion for what they did and how they approach their work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we've arrived at our final question, and it's going to take us 100 years into the future.
Yeah.
If you were to write a message to the Jodo Shinshu community a century from now, what would it say?
Mm. Maybe I don't know. This is a tough question, and there's so much you can say, but what popped into my mind is a humorous comment by Myokonin, enlightened person in Shin tradition,
Yeah.
Genza. And Joe and Andre, you probably know about this one, which I love is this Genza was a farmer, and one day it was just raining, so hard, but he had to go out and work in the fields, the rice paddy field. He worked all day, and he was drenching wet, and it was pouring. Finally, at the evening, he was able to go back and home, and he's walking in front of the temple, and the temple minister saw him and said, "Oh, Genza-san, it must be really hard, raining all this." But Genza, all he would respond and just mumble and say, I'm grateful, very grateful." And the priest says, "How can you be grateful? You're drenching wet, you worked all that." He says, "I'm grateful because the holes of my nose are pointing downwards." Okay, so I guess maybe the gratitude, of course, goes to the heart of the Shinshu spirituality, and that I think is something that goes to the heart and what is important, and I mention this because it goes to the heart of the Shinshu spirit. So if you can maintain that sense of gratitude and appreciation for what's in front of you,
Yes.
and to the statement, living in the now, in the present. And I want to end with this well-known American rendition of impermanence, that is that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but this moment is a gift. That's why we call it the present. And so those are the two thoughts that came to my mind, and I would leave this with the community 100 years from now.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Reverend Tanaka, thank you for sharing your wisdom, your humor, and your vision with us. Your life's work has touched countless people, and your commitment to both tradition and innovation is inspiring.
You've shown us how Jodo Shinshu Buddhism can stay deeply rooted while reaching across cultures and borders, and how each of us can play a role in nurturing a global Sangha. We're grateful not only for your contributions to the tradition, but also for your friendship and guidance and reminding us to live a life of gratitude.
Thank you for joining this special episode of Echo Ekoji. We hope today's conversation encourages you to explore the Dharma more deeply, wherever you are in the world. Until next time, may you be well, may you be happy, may you live in the embrace of Amita's boundless compassion. Reverend Tanaka, would you lead us in closing Gassho?
Okay. Namo Amida Butsu.
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 Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Da.
And you will announce the upcoming class, and please encourage them to take it. You will have 20 guest speakers